boom, boom, boom. Bang, 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 bang. Boom, 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 boom. How, 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 how. Hey, hey.
You gotta come on.
Got a special treat for our veterans today. My father's having an interview at this museum. And it is the Mid-America Veterans Museum. First time I've ever been here. We're in O'Fallon, Missouri. That's past St. Charles. And we're just going to see what happens today because I have no idea.
Love to have you here today.
We want to come early to see it.
I'll be sitting in on
Yes,
Mr.
good.
Reynolds, right?
Good.
I'm
Yeah.
Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
I heard your name.
Yes. Ethan.
This is their gift shop. Hey, I have this.
ROTC program in high school.
Oh, yeah.
I tried to get that started here. Nobody was interested.
Well, let me tell you the secret. We're close to Scott Air Force Base. Okay, 45
Oh, okay.
from Scott. And I tried for about 3 years to get the program, and we couldn't qualify. Too small a school, okay? Didn't have the right number of handicap, this and that. And so all of a sudden, one of my former graduates at the school there heard about my plight and called me and said, Mr. Reynolds, I understand you're trying to do this. And I said, yes. She said, well, I just happen to work for General so-and-so over at Scott Air Force Base. And I'd be, with your permission, I'd be happy to talk to him about it.
Wow.
I got it done.
I got it done.
That did it.
In fact, we were, you have to start a year ahead because it takes you a year to hire people and things like that.
Yeah.
He had it approved for that September, and we hadn't even started doing anything yet. But he just, when a general speaks, I guess.
People listen.
I guess
Yeah.
people listen.
So which school was that?
At Dupo High School.
Oh, okay. I grew up in Mascoutah. I was born in New Athens.
Yeah. Now
We used to play
Dupo,
you guys in basketball.
yeah, Dupo and Mascoutah now work together in the ROTC.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't even know that Mascoutah was involved in the ROTC.
yeah.
I'll be. Okay.
Well, we were the first to have it. And the reason I got it because I invited Cahokia Columbia to get the numbers I need.
I see on your hat, flying boxcars?
Yep.
I was in Naval Aviation, and we had a C-119 flying boxcar reserve Marine squadron was there, so I remember it very well.
Just to let you know that that's not all bad because one summer we didn't see us being in school. Summers were great for Missouri. So what happened one summer, one spring I got a call and said, well, said, would you like to fly for the Navy this summer? And so what are we going to do? Well, we're probably going to be that Dale plane. Norfolk, Charleston, and that's all we did.
Those are nice bases, though. So you flew into Rosie Roads, Naval Air Station Rosie Roads, right? Yep.
And the service was great. I thought it was complain about things
So one thing the Navy does is eat. We didn't do much else, but we did eat.
I didn't make a mistake. First of all, we were so amazed flying into Norfolk and see all those ships. I couldn't imagine that many ships in the world. And so I landed there, and next morning I got up and I said, this is Captain Reynolds. That's all I said, the transportation flight line. Here comes a car with a flag. Now think about that. I made a mistake.
Yes.
Because we deserved a pickup truck.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, I'd say, this is Captain Reynolds. They'd say, Air Force or Navy.
Navy. My sister was in the Air Force. My wife was in the Air Force too. She was in billeting in Naha, one time a Navy captain came in for billeting and she put him in an Air Force captain.
Force captain.
That was a big mistake. Texas.
Okay.
But that was, and it was a great museum, it's a huge museum. But we talked about the Tarawa campaign,
Sure.
the Marianas campaign. Here we talk about the soldiers. This is our World War I section. Give you some music here. I won't get into that. This is one of my favorite stories. I was an anti-submarine warfare. Slim Seabother, 6'3", and he was on a diesel boat. He carved that while he was on the boat, the USS Fukuda. And one of the funny stories that Slim used to say, he's 6'3", and I don't know if you've ever been on a diesel submarine. Okay, but they're a little cramped. And his comment was his forehead knew every particle on that. But one of my favorite story about Slim. He was born. Lateral duty in the submarine was to do all this. Normally, you look paid off of this
I moved to another city, so I wouldn't have to have him as a student, which was pretty good. I was just, he was, you know, we were just parents.
I got it,
I
yeah.
was not the principal.
All right.
So, Bill Reynolds, October 24th. All right. Do we wanna do it?
I think so. And
All right, we ready?
Just so you understand, Mr. Pollard here, Garvis, he's gonna take what we call a timeline. So as you're speaking with Shay and Jack, he's basically making chapters of your conversation.
Oh, okay.
And he's also gonna be kind of the moderator. If they maybe need to address a question better,
If you
he's
need me
gonna
to
tap them on
follow
the
up or
shoulder
anything
and
like that.
get that going.
In
I'll just look at you
addition,
to let you know.
I have a timer here. And the only condition we have today is this needs to go 30 minutes.
You won't have trouble with that.
But you won't have a problem with it, we never have. And we'll keep it going. I'm gonna be watching this monitor, writing down the time and so forth, so you can just forget I'm here. These are the two people that are.
Just wink at me when it gets to 29:30.
No, we won't be here.
Nah,
We want to hear
gotta-
all the stories. Keep us here for hours.
They want you to go to 35.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe 36 if we're lucky.
Does anybody want a water before?
I'll take that.
You take
I
one?
just grabbed one.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
He got me too,
All
so.
right. Water?
No.
No water?
Thank you, Jackie.
Alright, it's gonna be fun.
You guys are gonna do great. Bill's very easygoing, very friendly. This is just fun.
How would he know?
You gotta be
My
nice.
grandma
to us.
told me.
Grandma. Grandma told me. Yeah, miss her, miss Grandma.
Here you go, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
And you'll have to probably speak a little bit louder because we're farther away from the mic.
It's more fun out here though. Got more stuff to look at. Alright. You guys ready?
We're ready.
Alright. Alright, I'm Jack Sutton. I'm here with.
Shay Cashew.
We're here interviewing Bill Reynolds. It is October 24th, 2024. If you can just start off, kind of early life, tell us where you were born.
Well, I was born in Murfreesboro, Illinois. My grandfather was the county judge, and so they were sort of elite people in Murfreesboro. But that was only because when my mother got ready to deliver, she had to go back to the grandmother's house, and I was delivered in the sunroom. And I wasn't delivered by a doctor, I was delivered by one of those people that did those
Midwife.
things in those days.
Midwife.
Midwife, yes. And so I was born in the sunroom along with all my cousins. Okay, we lived in Dupo at the time, and my dad and myself, I was just a little guy, 2 years old. We went from Dupo to Murfreesboro in 89 minutes. That's 90 miles in 89 minutes in 1933, which was a challenge. Okay?
And did you have any siblings?
I had one brother. He's passed away. He was about 3 years younger than I was, and he was a Marine.
Oh.
Okay, and so I didn't mess with him. He was a pretty tough kid.
How did your parents and brother feel about you joining the service? And did your brother being
Well-
in the military have any influence on it?
I think the problem was that my father was in World War I, And he was in the artillery. And during one of the last battles of the war, he was severely wounded by the fact that, as I tell the story, a few years ago, if you were a kid who is uncontrollable, the parents would say, now if you don't behave, I'm going to send you to military school, right? My grandfather could not handle my father. He was a wild kid. And so he sent him to military school. And since my grandfather was a very well-to-do engineer on the railroad, my father had his own horse. So when it came time for World War I, what did you need to join to get ahead? You needed military training, and you needed to know how to handle horses. And so that's what he did. He went from private nobody to top sergeant in 6 months. Because he knew everything. The rest of the people didn't know how to do anything. He knew all about military, he knew all about horses. Rose to the top. He did get a battlefield commission because everybody was getting killed above him in rank. And he was severely wounded in one of the last battles by the fact that they had to move their unit. And just about the time they started moving the unit, the Germans began to shell his position. And of course, when shells go off, horses go what? They don't want to go. And so he knew what to do. He jumped on the lead horse, and away they went. About the time a German shell came down and exploded right under the horse. Okay, the horse was, of course, killed, and his legs were hanging down. He was severely wounded. They did not expect him to live, and they didn't send him back with all the other troops at the end of World War I. He stayed in France, in a French hospital, and they pretty much repaired his legs and ankles. And I have a letter from my grandfather to the general saying, when is my son coming home? And of course, the general told him, well, they didn't expect him to live, we weren't going to send him home. But he did, he survived, and he was my father after that. So, since he was in the military, guess what? We were expected to go. Nobody ever said it, but we were expected to join. Now, see, I flunked my Army physical. You know, when you got to be 18, you had to go take a physical, and I flunked it because I was the only guy called out of the room. And the doctor said, he said, you don't have to worry about this military. He said, you didn't pass your physical. And I said, you know, I'm in ROTC. I'd sort of like to fly. How do I mask it? And he told me how to mask my deficiency. And I did. They never did find out. And I got 6.5 good years of service time. And they just did not know that if I'd ever bailed out, see, I had bad trick knees. If I had bailed out, I'd probably had problems when I hit the ground. But I didn't bail out. Okay.
So was there a particular reason you chose to join the Air Force over the Army?
I was a little kid during World War II, and the thing that always made interest for me was airplanes. And so I built little paper models. I built little stick and paper models. I was always just, see, when I was a little kid, I could remember when Scott Field was a balloon base, or dirigible, whatever you want to call it. And I can remember those great big dirigibles going over my house in the 30s. And from that time on, I was always just, airplanes. That was a big thing. So when I had a chance to join Air Force ROTC, I took it at Southern Illinois University. And the result, it was all, see, and I never did fly. The first time I flew an airplane was after I was in the ROTC, went to summer camp. We had a chance to ride in a T-33 trainer, and the pilot was a crazy guy and made me sick. And of course, probably I should have dropped out then, but I didn't, I went to, after I went to primary, I had a great instructor. That we had something new called plastic bags in the 50s. Nobody ever had those before. So if I got sick, I'd fill up the plastic bag, twist it off. As we landed, he'd pull over next to the weeds, and I'd throw it off, and away we went. And you can't imagine what it takes when you quit getting sick. I can tell you the day I quit getting sick in the air. I soloed. If you solo, there's nobody up there to help you. So, and so your mind is always on flying, and so you don't get sick. And so I didn't get sick after that.
If you don't mind, could we back up a little bit? And
Sure.
Can you tell me about your time in ROTC and your schooling beforehand, before your
Okay, well, in high school, of course, I was a basketball player, and as a result, lessons were just secondary. And I can remember the day the counselor came down to the hallway and said, "Bill, can I talk to you a minute?" He said, "You know, I can get you a scholarship to college, but you have a 3.98 average and you need 4 points." And I only had a semester to do it. And so I did it. Made those up 2 points, got a scholarship, went to college. And of course, that was really a great experience in college. I still played basketball. I walked on at Southern Illinois University for 2 years. And that's another story that's not that interesting. I wasn't good enough to play college ball, but I had a connection. I just happened to run into the best player that they had on their team one weekend, and we played against him. I didn't know who he was. Played against him, and I guarded him, and I was a pretty good defensive person. And he was impressed. And so rather than cut like all the rest of the guys after the tryouts, he walked to the coach and he said, "Coach, keep that guy." And that's the only reason I was able to play college basketball. Not because I was good enough, just because I knew the best player, and I had a little bit of skills. I only played 2 years there, and I was a sophomore, and of course the JVs practiced at one end, and the varsity practiced at the other end, and all of a sudden I heard my name. The coach said, "Reynolds." I thought, here I go. Boy, I'm going to make it. He called me down to the varsity end, and he said, "Bill," he said, "you know a lot about basketball, and I appreciate that." And he said, "This guy who's starting for us doesn't know how to do this, this, and this. Would you go over and work with him?" And so I worked with him, and at the end of the year, the coach said, "Bill, you know I can't keep you." And I said, "Yes, sir, I know that." He said, "There's a little school over in Murfreesboro needs a coach, and I think you could get that job." And I did. So I coached little kids in the last 2 years. But there was never anything that was more important to me than flying. And I had a good time.
So during your time in the Air Force, what type of training did you receive?
Okay, I went in training in 1956, and as a result, in 1956, the Air Force was still organized as it was in World War II. So I went to a civilian training base. My instructor was a civilian. And of course, they had military on the field, and they gave us test flights and things, but I went to a civilian, just like in World War II. Okay, then after I passed out of primary, I went to Laredo, Texas for jet training in a T-33. And that was my first jet. And it was just a beautiful airplane to fly. We knew a lot about it, and I think I had the touch, if you know what I mean. I can't explain it to you, but my instructor in primary knew that I had something, and he worked with me, and of course, I think the higher I scored, the better recommendation he got, you know. But I got pretty high grades in primary, okay? I was top, above average. And then when I went to jets, I still had the skill to fly, but I got thrown in with all these guys from MIT and Caltech, okay? And I couldn't keep up with them in academics. And so I was just average. Academics, you don't know what it was. You ever heard of a T-score? Nobody's ever heard of a T-score. That's a way to grade that you don't want to be in. Because in a T-score group, somebody has to be the best, and somebody has to be the worst. You cannot, somebody's going to fail. That's the way it's set up. One time I got 96 on a big test. I got a C. The guys with 98 got a B, and the guys with 100 got an A. Okay? It was tough. And so I probably, if I'd have scored higher in academics, I probably could have been offered a permanent commission, a regular commission, but since I didn't, that was okay. And the big thing that probably saved my life, okay, you can say this, probably saved my life was the fact that I got married before I went in service. And then she became number one, and Air Force became number two. And that probably saved my life, because without her, I'd have stayed in, okay? I'd have probably gone to Vietnam, and you probably wouldn't have to listen to me today, because many of my buddies didn't come back.
Do you have any vivid memories from your school and training?
Oh, absolutely. That's the reason.
Well, let's hear some.
That's the reason I gave you this book that I have, because I knew that I wasn't going to stay in. It wasn't the kind of life that was nice to my wife. I was gone all the time. You know, I was gone one time 9 months. She didn't see me for 9 months, and you couldn't pick up a computer and call her. I put in a call one time, took 2 weeks, and I only got 10 minutes with her, you know, on the phone in 9 months. Yes, I 2 or 3 I'd just like to tell you. I was pretty high ranking in primary, and the instructor knew that, and I got done early, and I took my check ride early and got a high score. So I still had 2 or 3 hours to go, and you had to go exactly 140 hours. I mean, it couldn't be 140 hours in 1 minute or 1 minute less. It had to be exact. So I had some hours over. And he took me up and he said, "What do you want to practice?" And I said, "Well, let's practice forced landings." So we practiced a little bit of forced landing. And he said to me, "Is there any question you want to ask?" And I said, "Is it true that your ability to escape an airplane is better than what the book says?" The book says if you have to bail out, you climb out on the wing and dive over the trailing edge. He didn't do that. He was way ahead. He had one that the jets would use, whereby you would hold your stick, you would roll your trim, which is causing your nose to go down, and you hold the stick back while the airplane thinks it's supposed to go down. And then you loosen up everything, let go of the stick, and guess where you go? Out the top. And so that was always a better way to do it, of course. And so I asked that question, and all of a sudden he said, pull the throttle back, open the canopy, and said, "Get out on the wing." Okay? And he slowed it down to about 90 knots. And it took me, I don't know how long to get out on that wing. And my flight suit was whipping on my legs, and I could look over the wing and see these beautiful fields that I'd never seen in this position before. And finally he nodded to me, and I jumped back in. And I wrote a story about that and gave it to Flying Magazine. And I had somebody, you know, when you write a story to a magazine, you get all sorts of comments from people who don't believe it. And I got a comment from a guy who said, "The Air Force would never let anybody do that. That's a false story. It's no good." I started to answer it, and one of my buddies who was at the same table I was, he answered it. He said, "I know the instructor." He said, "I believe what he said, and don't challenge him anymore." Okay? That was the best part of my primary, because I was sort of popular for about 10 minutes. You know, I was the only guy that got out on the wing for 10 minutes. Okay? I guess the other two, well, one is not a bad story, but I was in fighter school, all-weather fighter school, and that was an airplane that was way ahead of its time. It was called an F-86D or L. And that was a radar-equipped airplane. In fact, the airplane was flown by a computer. Now, we didn't know what computers were, but we had lots of tubes and things in there. And it was flown pretty much by a computer. And one day, it was my turn to go high, and that meant 40,000 feet for a mission. And boy, I pulled her up to 40,000 feet, pulled it out afterburner, and the engine quit. Just, well, you couldn't restart at that altitude. And so I called in, and they shook them up pretty well, because it was a very, very safe airplane. Nobody had ever had a flame out, you know, in it. And so I called back, and they got a little shook up, but they guided me back. And as I got down to 30,000 feet, I started the airplane and came back in and landed, okay? And that, I was popular for another 10 minutes. And that wasn't very exciting, but I was the only one. You know, and they still had the old World War II. You know, I had an emergency. Guess what I had to do within an hour? I had to go back and fly again. In other words, if you come down and you have a problem, you get back in the air, you know. And so I had to fly again. That was the only exciting place in there. Then when I went to the squadron, I was the kind of person that, if this airplane will do it, let me see if it'll do more. And so one day I'd planned on going high, and so I set up I got an airplane, and it was a good one. And so I decided to see how high the F-86 could go. And so I went up to 40,000 like we always did, and just kept going to 42, 44, 46. The engine became so quiet I couldn't even hear it, because at altitude you don't have much air, so therefore you can't put much fuel in the airplane. So it's automatically cut back a little bit. So I got to 50,000, boy, and I thought, hey, I'm really up there. And then I had to run the airplane as fast as it could go to 0.99 Mach, and then I'd pull it up and see how high I'd climb. And it'd climb up, and then I went up to 52,250 feet. And that's a beautiful altitude to be at, okay, because guess what? You could see the slight curvature of the earth, not much, but you could see the curvature of the earth, and if you looked up, guess what you saw? A dark purple sky. And so that was, and I didn't have a camera either. And so that was pretty much fun. Nobody else did that. Okay, and so I was popular for another 10 minutes. And then we went to the squadron, went overseas to Morocco. We were on duty 24/7. Every fourth day, I put in 24 hours of alert time where the airplanes would sit at the end of the runway, and we were ready for the Russian bombers to come. They had us so brainwashed that we thought that we were important. We thought that if it happened, we were going to be at war, okay? And as a result, it was great duty, because the Italians had difficulty in staying on course and calling in and telling where they're supposed to be. Many times we'd go out and scramble against an Italian airliner who was off course. And in those days, there were no restrictions. There were always two of us, and guess what one guy would do? He'd go down, fly formation with the airliner and wave at the passengers. And the other ones had to stay high for radio contacts and so forth. And we had a lot of fun with that. Well, one day I was not, here's my other exciting part. I wasn't scheduled to fly, and that was really boring. I had to stay in the briefing room, and I had to bring up our board to date, our data board. We had to have certain things happen every quarter, and we had to keep it on the board. And so I was in there, I was bored, phone rang, picked it up, said, hey, you got a test pilot in there that can fly an 86, we got one in from Germany, and we need somebody to test it. I said, okay, I got somebody. Hung up the phone. And the reason I did this, because that morning at the briefing room, they said, now, there's going to be a Russian Tu-104 come over about 10:30, and we want you to stay away from his route of flight. Okay, we don't want you to mess around with him. Well, guess what? It was 10:10. I had 20 minutes. I knew what I was going to do. And so I rushed out, got in the airplane, went up, went back and forth. I had good radar, went back and forth. He was late or early. He didn't show. Okay, 10:30 came and nobody there. So I decided to play Thunderbird or Blue Angel. And so I'd pull the airplane around and do all sorts of crazy maneuvers like that. And as I pulled one of these high G turns, I noticed that we had two little lights on the dashboard. One was yellow, and that said, be prepared, you got a problem going to come. And the other one said, bail out, okay? Because you really had some problems within the engine fuel tank area, okay? And so I noticed that the red lights started coming flashing on, and I rolled out real quick, and I thought, must be the sun flashing on the lights. So I went back in and started doing the same thing. It blinked again, and I rolled out again. And I said, well, I'm just going to ignore it. So I went back to some more maneuvers, and pretty soon all of a sudden lights came on bright and stayed on. Okay, the first thing you do when something like that happens is stop the throttle, turn the engine off real quick. And I looked in the rearview mirror and I couldn't see any smoke or anything coming out the back, so I figured, well, it's okay, I'll just take it back and land it. And I was only about 20 miles away, and that's easy to glide back. So I glided back and made a fancy landing, and instead of letting the fire trucks followed me down the runway. I wanted to show off a little bit, so I saw him over there, and so I landed, put on the brakes, pulled off, and sat right in front of the fire trucks. Okay, and here comes my crew chief, or the line chief, and the firemen out, and they get about 30 feet from the airplane, and they go, and so that meant get out. So as I jumped out and down the side of the airplane, you could hear the fuel boiling in the tanks. What had happened was we had fuel tanks wrapped around the engine, and the bottom of the engine broke, okay? The bottom of the engine had a crack and separated, and all that hot gas was going down against the fuel tanks, okay? Now, I saved myself by, you remember I stop-cocked the throttle real quick, which shut off the heat, and so the fuel was boiling very much. The tanks were melting too, by the way. We had rubber fuel tanks, and the tanks were melting, but they didn't melt all the way through, okay? But the fuel was still boiling in the tanks, and we had to stay away from the airplane for about 20 minutes. And of course, they had to replace the engine, and they had to replace all the fuel tanks because they were within, oh gosh, just a quarter of an inch of going through. Now, if they'd have gone through, the fuel would have ignited, and the airplane would have blown up. Well, I was popular for another 10 minutes, okay, because nobody ever had one of those things happen to you. And so then everything was pretty much as normal. We did a lot of alert time, we did a lot of scramble intercepts, and these were actually fun. You know, we just, who are we going to find tonight? You know, one night we found a secret Navy spy plane who didn't file a flight plan, and the weather was pretty bad, okay, and we were up, I was up with my flight instructor, and he said, Bill, you ever joined on an airplane in weather? And I said, no. And so radar would allow us to do that. I didn't see him until I got up right close to him. The radar was telling me where he was. And I called him and he wouldn't answer. So I switched over to something called Guard Channel. That's a channel that everybody in the world listens to, okay? And I tried to call him and he wouldn't answer me. And so we were getting low on fuel, so we came back. And as we parked, we were met by the flight commander and the operations officer. They met us. Normally they didn't do that. And they said, you two guys are the ones that got that Navy spy plane? And we said, yes. They said, well, you just told the Russians what was going on because the Russians had a fishing boat all fixed up with radios and stuff in the Mediterranean, and they had one in the Atlantic. They listened to everything we said, okay? And so when I called that guy, they knew exactly where that Navy spy plane was, okay? Now, one thing, before I tell you the last good story, I need to tell you what they didn't tell us as pilots, okay? We were at a SAC base, Strategic Air Base, and on this base were 6 B-47 bombers and 6 nuclear bombs, okay? We were there to keep the Russians off until the bombers got off, okay? Once they got off, they didn't need us anymore. But anyway, the bombers, we had a lot of conflict at the club with the pilots. Those guys thought they were better than anybody. And finally one day, the commander said, look, I'm tired of this at the club. You guys, one of these days you're going to get in a fight, and I just don't think that's the way it is. So today you're going to be B-47 pilots. We went down to the briefing room, we talked to their pilots. I immediately became very impressed because their mission was target plus 500 miles. That's all they had in fuel, okay? And they only had 2 refueling airplanes on the base. Now think about that. 6 bombers, 2 refueling airplanes. They only got Moscow plus 500 miles. That's all they had. I had a lot of respect for them. And they couldn't get off the runway in the summertime because it was so hot. And so they had to rig JATO units around the back. These are little rocket units to cause more speed so they could get off the runway. But they had to be going a certain speed before they could fire the rockets, because if they fired them too soon, they'd burn holes inside the airplane, okay? And so if they got to this certain speed and the rockets didn't go off, they didn't have enough room to stop. And so I can still remember that stupid fighter pilot in the back of the room that said, what happens if you do that? And this pilot very calmly said, well, sir, all we do, the first guy that has a problem, he makes sure that he pulls off to the right and crashes into the side of this part of the base, okay? And he said, if there's two that happen, the other guy has to go to the other side of the runway because we have to keep the runway clear, okay? And so as a result, you can see that became funny. But what happened was, in an FA-6 fighter, we could take off at about 3,000 feet. Now, I had a 12,000-foot runway, but we could take off at about 3,000 feet. That day, it was hot, the runway's slightly uphill, and he said, you can't use your afterburners. Now, not using your afterburner is about like a B-47 because they had the same engines we did, only we had an afterburner. And they just had regular engines. So here we go. We had to play like pilots. We had to figure how fast we were going at 1,000 feet. And we had to figure out how fast we were going at 2,000 feet. Because if you weren't going those speeds, you weren't going to get off. I was still on the ground at 10,000 feet, 12,000 foot runway. I was still on the ground and getting nervous. I only had 2,000 feet left to go. And boy, was I getting nervous. My hand was about ready to punch the burner, you know. Finally, I felt the wheels loosen up a little bit. And finally, I got off the end of the runway. Pulled up those wheels real quick. And so I had a lot of respect for the bomber pilots. That's why they took off every day. Every time they did it, they were like that. And so we had a lot better, for instance, we got along with them a whole lot better. And for one good reason, one of the refueler airplanes took my motor scooter back to the States, which they weren't going to do. The Air Force wasn't going to do that. Okay, so let's get down to the end. I was supposed to, we were all of a sudden got the fact that we were going to get out 3 months early. They didn't need us anymore. And so we were supposed to have 3 years, but they're going to let us go in 2 years and 9 months. And so we were 2 years, 8 months, the 15th of February, supposed to get out the end of February, and they came through and said, oh, you 4 guys are now grounded. You can't fly anymore. Well, if you've ever remembered the stories about World War II, a lot of guys supposedly got killed on the last flight. And they didn't want us to have a last flight, okay? And so they grounded us. Now, fighter pilots who are used to flying every day, that is just almost, it's unbearable, okay? I used to go down to the simulator building and fly with the simulator. I always had my chute and my helmet in the back of my motor scooter, so I'd go down to the alert shack. Hey, you guys need to go any place, I'll take your alert for a while. One day I went down there and the guy said, Bill, take my alert. He said, this is my wife's birthday and I didn't get her anything today. He said, I got to go up to PX and get some stuff. I said, sure, no problem. Put my stuff in, got my airplane ready to go, and the alert horn went off. Well, we had 4 airplanes. 2 would go first, and if it went off again, the other 2 would go, okay? So the alert horn went off, and first 2 guys went off, and the second 2 normally went and sat in the airplane for a while. And so I sat in the airplane, and the horn went off again, okay? And I told the crew chief, I said, go in and check. That's just bound to be a mistake, okay? I'm not supposed to fly. All right. He went in, and he came out like this, and away we go. So this other fellow and I took off together, and we were directed in the wrong direction. Normally, when we took off Sunny-Semaine, we headed toward the Mediterranean, because that's the way the Russian bombers were going to come. This time we headed west. We thought, boy, that must be an Italian airliner. Okay, and sure enough, here we get close, and there's that Italian airliner. We made a run. The guy that I was with, I let him be the lead. See, that was another story, which I'll tell you after this one. We always wanted to be the leader. Well, this time, since I wasn't supposed to fly, I let him lead, because I could get out of the shack faster than he could. I just had that ability. And so he went down and waved at the passengers and had a good time, and I stayed up. And finally I said, Armin, it's time to go back. We're getting low on fuel. We were about 50 miles out. And so we turned back, and all of a sudden, my airplane, I checked, we always check our instruments just every 5 seconds or so. And I noticed my oil pressure gauge was going up. I'd never seen that happen before. Pretty soon it hit the red line and hit the stop. and the airplane began to start to vibrate a little bit, and it began to vibrate a little bit more, and I couldn't focus on anything. It was really vibrating down, and I shut off the engine, of course, and the engine came to a stop. Now, if an engine comes to a stop, it's not whirling anymore. Even when it's not running, it still whirls. And we had to have the engine whirling to have pressure for the hydraulics, and it had pressure for the brakes, it had pressure to lower the gear, it had all this kind of, and it had pressure to guide the airplane. But guess what? This engine came to a stop. Now guess what? Now I don't have the guidance of the airplane. All right? However, North America was pretty smart. They put an extra battery in, and if you had that situation, you had 10 minutes of battery life to guide the airplane and land it. Okay? But since we're 50 miles out, I just shut everything off. And I was able to guide the airplane by electric little trim tabs we had. And so we were coming back, and he hit that, and I turned my radio on because I turned everything off. I turned the radio on, and he said, "Bill, you better tighten up." He said, "It looks like you're going to have to bail out about 5 miles to the base." And of course, that got my attention. And I got a little nervous. And we were gliding back, and so I tightened up, getting ready to eject. And he said, "Bill, the winds have changed 180 degrees. Now think about this. The winds, we had winds in Morocco called sirocco's, and they would go up to 60 miles an hour off the desert, okay? And they were blowing that day. But anyway, all of a sudden, between mid and altitudes, the wind had changed, and it was blowing from the west rather than the east. I won't tell you what I think about that real quick, unless you ask me. But anyway, he said, "You're going to make it. You're going to make it." And so sure enough, I got close to the base. I could see the base. I was gliding in, came into the right altitude, and I switched on the battery. And I heard the pump. The pump started up, and I could guide the airplane. And the tower said, "So-and-so, nobody's made a forced landing all day," said, "Make this one in close." And so the wind was blowing about 30 to 40 knots down the runway. And so I made my, I normally landed at the end of the runway because you show off a little bit. Land at the end of the runway, you don't have to use brakes or anything. So I made sure I was going to land about a third of the way down. And I came in on downwind, and everything was going, the wind was really blowing. And I turned on the base, and I could see that it's a good thing I planned on landing halfway down, because the wind was blowing so hard, that I was just barely going to make the runway. I could see that. Okay, now keep in mind that old pump is just a humming and a running. Okay, and everything's going right, and I lined up with the runway, and I could see I was just barely going to make it. Okay, and just before the wheels touched down, the pump went boom. Okay, and the pump stopped, but I was so close that I just touched down on the runway. Now, 10 seconds, I'd have been like this. I couldn't have bailed out because you had to be 200 feet in the air before the chutes would open. I was a lot below 200 feet, and so I wouldn't have been able to bail out. I could have ejected, but I just made a big blob in the dirt out there on someplace. And so as a result, as I touched down and went out, I had no control, but on the ground you don't need control because you have pedals, which are not run by hydraulic system. They're run by wires. And so again, I played the game, rolled up, fire trucks were all there. I rolled up, pulled off in front of the fire trucks, okay? Crew chief came out, shook my hand. Boy, he was really happy to get his airplane back because he didn't want to lose another one. We'd already lost a couple, which bailouts. And as a result, crew chief pulled up. It was the line chief, not my crew chief. The line chief was the guy in charge of everything. He jumps up on this, line chief jumps up on the side of the airplane and says, "Lieutenant, I'm going to help you out." And guess what I couldn't do? I unstrapped. I could not get out. I could not make my muscles move. Okay, I was frozen. I was frozen in there, and there's just no way. I guess I was so nervous that my legs had just gone into spastic cramps of some sort. I could not move. He recognized it very quickly. He said, "Sir, why don't you just stay in the airplane while we pull it into the ramp?" So I stayed in the airplane, trying to relax, and my legs were a little tight. I could feel it. Pulled in, he had to help me out of the airplane. I was so nervous, I guess, I didn't know I was, but I was so nervous that I could not get out of that airplane. So finally he got me down. Now keep in mind, guess what that was? My last flight. Remember, World War II, always get killed on your last flight. And so guess what? The commander, he sought me out. He'd already lost 2 airplanes. The guys had bailed out, you know, but if he lost the 3rd one, he was on the way out. And he came out and he shook my hand, the only time he'd ever been nice to me. And he bought me dinner that night. And I brought his airplane back, see. And he was pretty happy. So I was popular for 20 minutes that time. And especially with the commander, because we didn't like him. Somehow or another, pilots did not like commanders. And we made fun of him, and we didn't like him and all this, but he wasn't such a bad guy after he bought me lunch, or dinner at the club, so. Those are the good stories. There was something else I wanted to tell you about. I forgot about it now. What I was going to tell you about what we did. Oh, I know what it was. They didn't teach you how to be an alert pilot. If I ever had to go back in, I'd tell somebody something. They taught you how to fly the airplane, but they didn't teach you how to go on alert. Okay, where you had to run out and have the airplane off within 3 to 5 minutes. They didn't teach you that. Okay, you had to just pick it up on your own. And the first night I was on alert, I was going to be like the fireman. See, I kept my boots on, and I took my flight suit off, and I laid the boots and the flight suit on the floor, so that I could pick it up, put it on, put my boots on, and this kind of stuff. The alert horn went off at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was sound asleep, okay? I was really sound asleep. Finally got my boots on, got and I pulled out of the dressing room, and there was a hallway. It didn't make any difference which way you went. It was going to go to your airplane. I went down the hallway one way, and I thought, that must not be the right way. Turned, went down the hallway the other way. Oh, that must not be the right way. Okay. I finally got out to the airplane, and of course I had a great crew chief, and he got me in, and we got off, and I took off, and just about the time I turned to go on course, they canceled the alert. Okay. And at that time, a shock went through my body, because I knew I had done something wrong. I had forgotten to pull the safety pins out of the seat and the canopy. In other words, if I'd have pulled the handles to eject, they wouldn't have pulled, okay? There'd have been these pins stuck in down at the bottom, which you couldn't get to anyway, you know. And so, as a result, I pulled the pins out real quick, landed, didn't tell anybody about that. That was embarrassing. They'd have probably grounded me if they'd have found out about that kind of stuff, you know. And the other thing I was going to tell you is the fact that fuel was a very important thing in the airplane. We had about 2 hours of fuel if you didn't use your afterburner too much, okay? Normally on alerts, you got normally an hour, 30 minutes out of it at the best. We had fuel tanks, had drop tanks. So along about November, the commander came in and said, hey, we're going to take the drop tanks off. You guys are now going to have 45 minutes of fuel. We still had to go 200 miles and back, okay? Didn't have drop tanks. The book says you can't make it. So everybody had to design their own little gimmicks. Mine was that I put my afterburner handle all the way up, and then I'd pull it back to half. That means I only had half the amount of thrust, but I was only burning half the amount of fuel, okay? So I'd take off and I'd lie a little bit. They'd say red flight altitude, and number 1 would say 10,000, number 2 would say 9,000, number 3 would say 8,000, I was only at 7. So I'd lie a little bit just to let them know I was right in the right position, okay? So we'd get up, run an intercept on the target. Number 1 would say, number 1, break off minimum fuel. And that meant, hey, I don't have enough fuel to get back, so make sure it's clear when I get there. Number 2 would say, number 2, break off minimum fuel. I was number 3. I'd say, number 3, break off. How about a reattack? That means I got another shot at the target. Because guess who had more fuel than anybody else? I had like 500 pounds more fuel because I hadn't used as much going up, all right? They never could figure that out. Now, why they didn't do that for everybody, I don't know. But we kept that service secret. I didn't tell anybody. Nobody asked me, okay? And the other exciting thing was, one night, beautiful, in Morocco, it's beautiful in the wintertime. The temperature is not 120 like it is, it's only about 90 to 100. And the evenings are just beautiful because it gets cool very quickly. I slept under a blanket every night because it got down to 60 degrees every night. So we were taxiing out one time. It was such a beautiful night. I thought, this is just going to be the best night in the world. And I was number 3 again. See, if you have all your intercepts up, you get to be number 3. I had more intercepts than anybody else. I always had good ones, and so I was always number 3. You know, number 1 and 2 pull out on the runway. I was standing on the taxiway. Number 1 and 2 take off, and about the time they were taking off, I hear the Aero Club 172 line up on their runway, which was north of ours, and they had to take off north. And I knew that 172 was going to take off, and I thought, nobody's ever shot down a 172 before. I think I'll take a run on him, okay? So they took off, I took off, he was off, take off the ground. As I made the turn, I didn't climb, I stayed at traffic pattern altitude. As I came around toward where he would be, my radar had a beautiful blip on the radar because his big propeller was running that radar back at me, and it was fantastic. And so I laid there, and I didn't call anything. I didn't tell him I was coming, but I made a run on him, and I just passed behind him. And about that time, the tower operator saw all this. He knew what was going on. And he said, very quietly, he said, "Nice shot, number 3. Okay? I started off, my flight commander was in the number 1 ship, okay? And he says, "Reynolds, what's going on back there?" I said, "Everything's okay, that's fine." You know, we didn't tell him. Went on, came back, and everything we did was on a big tape behind us that recorded our movements on the radar. And so, boy, the first thing I did was get that out, put it on the display to see that first intercept, okay? And there it was, just as beautiful as you want to see. The blip was higher than any target we'd ever had because of the propeller. And the run was just perfect. I just shot him down just perfect as could be. I watched that thing about 3 or 4 times. And finally, of course, the flight safety officers, he's always messing around. And so we had to say, well, can't see it anymore, because if he'd have seen that, he'd have gotten me in trouble. I'd have been grounded, you know, or something like that. But the commander pretty much, he took care of us. Remember the one I told you the story about the tanks almost on fire, almost blew up? The flight safety officer came and said, "Bill, I'm going to take you before a flying evaluation board. We're going to ground you, because what did the book say?" I said, "The book said to eject, but I didn't see any smoke." See, I have a nice rear view mirror. I didn't see any smoke, so I chose that it was not necessary to eject. He said, "That's not what the book says." And so I thought, oh boy, here it goes, here it is. Well, the commander, remember, had already lost 2 airplanes. He didn't want to lose that 3rd one. And so I brought that one back, and guess what? He told the flying safety officer to tear up that paper. "You're not doing it to him." Okay. So they just tore it up, and I was okay. And so sometimes I was on the edge a little bit, because I had a good time. Okay. I just had a good time. The other one I had was, I believed in 5 more minutes. Okay. We'd come back from a mission low on fuel. We would land with not enough fuel to almost taxi in, and we'd leave the engine run in the parking spot until it quit. And then the crew chief would run up and make sure the gauge was at the right spot. We never had enough fuel, but remember, I always had a little bit more. And so one day we came back in, everybody else had landed, and I was the last guy in. Instead of landing, I did a touch and go to shoot another landing, because I had 500 pounds of fuel. You're supposed to land at 6. I had 5, that's enough. And so I landed 500 pounds of fuel, made a touch and go, pulled up again. Well, now I'm down to 300 pounds of fuel, okay? Went and landed again, pulled up. I was going to have about 200, that was enough. And just about the time I got there, the tower called and said, so-and-so, I'm sorry, sir, but we've got a C-47 on final that I didn't know was on final. He said, you can't land. So I pulled it up in a flame-out position, and I was down to about 200 pounds at that time, okay? And as a result, I knew that that guy, if he lands properly, I'll be able to get in behind him. And so I could see him coming slow as could be. He finally landed, and I was coming down, and I said, request a short field landing behind the C-47. And he knew that I could do that. See, they knew our numbers. We had numbers. And they knew I was pretty good. You could land and stop that F-86 in 1,500 feet because you had a drag chute. And you could just stop that and pull off the runway, you know. And so I figured, hey, I'll just land behind him and I'll just pull off, okay? And the tower said, Roger, remember you're cleared for a short field approach behind the C-47. No problem. I made sure that I landed the runway. I felt the tires go over the cable that went across the end of the runway. There was a cable there, and you could feel it as your tires went over it. I felt like that tire, no problem, touched down, pulled the drag chute, didn't work. Okay, had a jam drag chute, okay? And now I'm going, 120 knots. And that C-47 is taxiing at about 10 knots, I guess. And so I was going to close on him pretty fast. And so we had excellent brakes on an F-86. You could stop the wheels anytime you wanted to by putting on the brakes. And so I was pushing on the brakes, and I think my right leg was a little bit more nervous than my left leg because I think I pushed on it just a little too hard and blew a tire. Now, no problem, blowing a tire, you come to a stop pretty quick. And again, I pulled off by the fire trucks, because they knew I was coming. And of course, the crew chief, first thing he did was, if you blew a tire and your flaps were down, the rubber that came off that tire would put holes in your flaps. And if that would have happened, they'd have grounded me for good. But right after landing, first thing you do is pull up your flaps before I push on the brakes. So he looked under, he looked up at me and he said, okay. And the second guy came up and he looked in the cockpit, and I still had 100 pounds of fuel, okay? And so I wasn't out of fuel, They didn't care how much, just so you had some. Because most of the time you just run into the taxi or the parking spot, let the engine run, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, that's how close we were on fuel. So some of the guys, we had some guys from Korea. My favorite pilot had knocked down 9 MiGs in Korea, and he was personable. He would talk to you. He would be your friend. Some of the guys wouldn't do that, And he was such a good guy, And it just so happens that we loved to fly with him. He was just one of the special guys. Some of them weren't. I won't mention the other guy's name. He knocked down 15 MiGs in Korea, okay? He wouldn't talk to us. He was too good. We were when I was at the Westover base, he was in the other squadron. We'd love to talk to him, He was famous. He was the second highest scoring ace in Korea, and he wouldn't talk to you, Another little short story, which isn't exciting, but one day I didn't have a target. I didn't have anything to do, so I just decided I'd go up and look at the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was a blue, beautiful blue, okay? Gibraltar was there, and the Atlantic was dirty ocean. You could see where the dirty water was coming into the nice blue Mediterranean. So I thought, I'll go up and look at that. I had some fuel, so I came back. And just flying around, just enjoying myself. Ground control said, so-and-so, looks like we got 2 of Jaeger's boys coming out of Sparta, or out of Madrid. And Jaeger was the most famous pilot in the world, Chuck Yeager. He had his squadron over in a place called Morón in Spain. And these guys would come out of Spain down to, because we had unrestricted airspace. And he said, I think there's 2 of Yeager's boys, you want to take a run at them? And of course I did. He said, stay below 34. And the reason I stayed below 34 because contrails started at about 36. And if I'd have been in the contrail area, they'd have seen me coming. So I stayed at 34, had them on radar, here they were, two F-100s, beautiful, coming down there. I made a run on them. They didn't see me coming. The first thing they do is when I flash by them, you know, I could see their wings go this way. All right, and so I knew their power. See, they had twice as much power as we did. And so I knew I couldn't tackle it. I couldn't mess with it. So I slowed the airplane down, put out the slats, which comes out to a slower airspeed, with more lift, and pointed the nose at them as they were starting their turn to get me. I just pointed the nose at them, and I just kept it like this. They couldn't get me. And finally, they got about 180 degrees, and I saw them this way. The wingman broke off, and I knew that's it. He's going to get me. All right. So what I did, I just pulled it up. I was slow. I just put a little spiral, went down into the clouds, and stayed in the clouds. They couldn't go in the clouds because they didn't have radar like we did. So I went in the clouds, went back to the base, came out of the clouds, looked around. The controller said he thought they got too low for him to see, so I thought they were looking for me. I came out of the clouds, they weren't there, landed, didn't tell anybody, okay? He didn't tell anybody, and about 2 days later, commander comes in the morning, he says, all right, which one of you guys did it? He didn't tell us what, I knew what he was saying. I just sat there quiet. He said, come on now, I know what somebody got to the Jaegers, boys. He said, Jaeger will be here in 2 weeks, he's gonna come down to see us. I thought, here we're gonna meet the most famous pilot that I knew of. We had a big reception for him. He was on one side of the room, we were on the other. We were not allowed to just go around. We had to be called over. And so they told him the story, they pointed me out, and you know he wouldn't talk to me. He would not shake my hand. He did not want to talk to me. And I felt sorry for those two pilots, because if he wouldn't talk to me, those guys really caught it for letting an F-86 shoot down two 100s, you know. And he did look over at me, and he shook his head. That's as close as I got to Chuck Yeager. Okay. Now, 10 years ago, the story I had, that story's in the book. The Yeager story's in the book. I tried. He had a website, so I tried to talk to him. He wouldn't answer back. Now he's probably not doing it. He's got aides that do that, but they were just blowing out. So finally, I sent him the story. Didn't ever hear back. Never have heard back. And so I was at a meeting one time where there were pilots that did all this, and I told them that story, and they said, that's okay, he was like that. You messed up one of his boys. He was mad at you. He would hold a grudge if somebody outdid his pilots, okay? And I really felt sorry for the pilots that he had. And they said, don't worry about it, he's like that. He wasn't mad at you, he was just mad at what you did. So, hey, that's all I can think about unless you have another question. I wish you'd have looked at the book before. You could have come up with some questions.
And I mean, it sounds like you're a whole lot more popular than just 10 minutes.
Yeah. That's what I was
I mean,
thinking, too.
Well, we
that
did.
seemed like a whole lot more than just some training.
No, it just had a good controller, and they were just they were good airplanes, but they didn't have radar, and so I could see them and they couldn't. Oh, I'll tell you. How about Top Gun? I forgot to tell you, I was Top Gun in training. Not because of me, because my next door neighbor was the line chief, okay, in Worry Housing. I got to know him. When I got ready to solo in an F-86, my crew chief got up, and then the crew chief had to get down, and guess who got up on the side of my airplane? My neighbor, the line chief. I didn't know that, okay? And as I came back from that solo flight, crew chief jumps up and he looked at me and said, are you somebody special? And I said, no, I'm just a plain old guy. He said, do you know who that was that helped you get started? I said, no. I said, he's my neighbor. He said, he's the line chief. He's in charge of all these airplanes. Now, we would send our name down to fly. They would put a number on the back of our name, and that was the airplane we were going to fly. Guess who always had the best airplane? Okay, guess who had the best radar? Guess who set the records on number of intercepts? Okay, now guess who got to be number one? The crew chief. I wish I'd have given him the award. I didn't get to see him because he was out someplace when I left, and I didn't get to see him, and I didn't thank him. Well, he knew, you know, I thanked him enough for being my friend, but I didn't thank him enough for getting that number one slot, you know. And the other story was, we didn't ever hear about Top Gun. Top Gun wasn't out yet, okay? But, just to let you know, that there was an airplane that used to fly across our area from Malta. You know where that is. Malta is a little island in the Mediterranean that was popular in World War II. With a Canberra B-57, it would fly from Malta to Gibraltar. Now, we could pretty good up to 42,000 feet, but he'd fly 50,000, okay? And we couldn't get up to him. We could never catch him. But the deal was, we're trying to get the Gibraltar run, as we called it. And one day we're coming back from a mission, and the ground controller said, "Hey guys, you want to try the Gibraltar run? He looks like he's starting to descend." That's the only time you can get him, is when he's descending down to Gibraltar. So sure enough, they set us up, and I was leading that day, and number 2 went up on the step, and I pulled in next to the Canberra coming down. We were about 38,000, and so I tried to call him. Again, I called him on, and he never would. He had his head down, and I figured he was looking at his radar, because he was trying to find Gibraltar on the radar so he'd be on course. Okay, I called him, and finally my wingman said, "Bill, we're getting low on fuel, we need to get back." He said, and I wanted to let him know that we got him, you know, and so I played Top Gun. I rolled over, because the sun was shining, I rolled over the top and made sure just like on my hand, made sure the shadow went across his canopy, and he looked up. Okay, that's all I needed, okay? Now, I wasn't like, you know, a Top Gun was what, 3 or 4 feet? I was like 30 feet, okay, or 30 or 40 feet above him. I wasn't close to him, okay? And of course, the nice thing about it was, the controllers, the radar controllers got credit for that too. See, we got credit, but those controllers got credit because their airplane, this guy's airplane, had intercepted the Gibraltar run. We got met by all the old guys as we landed, these two young troops. They didn't like us. They were mad. And the old guys were mad at us because 2 young guys got the Gibraltar run, you know. But that was good. Another 10 or 15 minutes. So that was just another good thing that just happened to me. I didn't try it, it just happened.
So if you could kind of like fill me in. That was all throughout your service, correct?
That was my active duty fighter service.
Wow, okay.
Okay,
So
then
like,
I did go back in reserves. See, I got out. I was married, got out, got a job. And guess what I missed? I missed flying so bad. And so over at Scott Field in Illinois, they had a reserve unit flying cargo, paratroopers. So I went over and said, "Oh yeah, we'll take you. We don't like fighter pilots, but we'll take you." So I got over there, and I had about 2.5 years of dropping troopers. No exciting things ever happened, you know. I didn't have anything exciting happen. But the fact of the matter was, I got to see 42 troopers jump out of the back of my airplane. And I got to see 2 Jeeps go out the back of the airplane. And I got to see 1 6-by going out of the back of the airplane. And it was pretty, you know, and they would laugh at me. I was sort of the joke. You ever heard about the joke about the guy, the keys to the pitching mound, or the I don't know, keys to the batter's box or something, you know? I was sort of like that guy, you know. I was a fighter pilot, and it was easy to fly the airplane, but one time, 2 things happened to me going to summer camp. Number 1, as we were going to summer camp, 16 airplanes were going east. And so we were flying, and there was guys, and my instructor said, "Have you ever flown formation?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I've flown a little bit." He said, "Okay, I want you to fly formation on a guy ahead of us." He called him. I just thought you flew formation in a big airplane like you did a little airplane. So I just pulled up. I had wingtip clearance and nose tail clearance. And these guys were looking around. I could feel them around the cockpit. They were, you know, saying things and looking all sorts of things. That's not the way you flew it. You flew formation like this. So I just flew formation like the regular. Okay? And so it just so happened that a photographer on the ground was taking pictures of these airplanes dropping troopers. And he just happened to take a picture of our flight. And here's 2 airplanes close together, and the third one's way out here. And so they put the picture on the bulletin board, and put Reynolds and put an arrow up to my airplane, okay? And I, you know, it was pretty, I was the best formation pilot in the whole squadron because that's what I'd flown. And the thing about it is, one other time, when you're at summer camp and you're having mock combat, the fighters get to make runs on you, okay? And the first time a 100 came and made a run on us, I immediately just did this. You know, put the throttle forward and tried to chase him. Well, you know how far I got, don't you? About half a mile. He was so far ahead, you know. And of course, guess who laughed at me? They all had it in the cockpit. They laughed at me. You can't shoot down that. But it was just, it was a reaction. I didn't control that reaction. It was just something that would have happened if I'd have been in a fighter. I'm running out of stories, guys. I don't have any more, I don't think.
Well, was there any particular friends that you made that you still remember or are in contact with?
Yeah. I only have one. I used to have two, but we don't hear from him anymore. He's not too well. I still have one, and he's the guy that defended me on that article that this guy challenged me about. He's the guy that defended me, and he was an engineer, and he still lives up in New York, and we call on the phone all the time. He retired as an airline pilot, and we still talk down there. He's the only one that I remember. By the way, the guy that, remember I brought me back when my bearings collapsed and the engine stopped? It just so happened that about 4 weeks before that, he came to me and said, Bill, he said, could I borrow $200 from you? He said, I'd like to bring my wife over. He was a regular. He's going to stay. He said, I just don't have the money. I just went in my pockets, pulled out and gave him $200. Okay, guess who was my wingman the time I had the bad experience and almost didn't make it back? He was. And so it was awful nice, you know, I knew that he would do the best for me than anybody. So that, you know, that's called friendship. But see, a lot of those guys didn't come back from Vietnam, which I feel sorry about. And of course he gave me the $200 back before I left, you know, no big deal. But I didn't even question it. Just gave it to him. And I did have one other story that's probably not very interesting. Remember I said 4 guys in an alert shack? And guess what the challenge was? See who could be first, okay? And so I had probably the second best crew chief in the squadron. And the thing about it was, pilots did not select crew chiefs selected pilots that they wanted to work with, okay? So I must have had a pretty, well, I treated them all pretty nice. So I got the second best crew chief. And one day we didn't have anything to do and we're sitting out in the airplane. And he said, sir, is there anything I could do for you? And I said, yeah, I'd like to be number 1. He said, well, I'd like for you to be number 1 too. And he said, so let's work on it. So he said, let me study things. And so the next day we went back, came back, he said, I think I know how to do it. He said, we had 2 inverters. Now that changes direct to alternating current. And they ran the tubes in the airplane. They ran the controls, they ran the starters, they ran all this kind of stuff. He said, I think if we start on the alternate inverter, which is never used, he said, I think that'll be a stronger source of electricity. And he said, I think it'll make things work faster. And so that time we had an alert, and he looked at me and he put his thumbs up and I put my thumb up, so we were going for the record, okay? And so what we do is I'd go out, put my stuff on, climb up in, he'd start the airplane starter, the extra power unit that we had attached to the airplane. And I'd get in, start putting stuff in, and he'd come around and jump up, and he would reach in and wait for the light to go out. And once the light went, it meant you could start. And as soon as that light blinked, he'd start it while I was still strapping in, okay? And as soon as I got strapped in, helmet on, I'd look over at him and he'd jump off to pull the cable out. And we knew we were going to get it because, boy, the time was really great. He jumped out, went under the airplane, and grabbed hold of the cable, and guess what? It was stuck. It was frozen. He couldn't pull it out. And so he's a smart guy. He thought, I'll just hang on to it, and when he pulls out, he'll pull the cable out when it goes to the end, okay? So he did that. He held on it. I went out, way ahead of number 2, hadn't even started to come out. And as he pulled it, he I boosted the power up too much, okay? As he pulled it out, he was laying there, and the jet blast picked him up and rolled him down the concrete. When I got back, it looked like he'd been in a fight with a bear. Okay, scratched up, you know, he just scratched up all over the place. And all he did when I came in to check on him, he said, "We made it, didn't we, sir?" And I said, "Yeah, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. From the time the horn went off until the time the wheels came up was 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Nobody had ever come close to that. Normally you had to get off in 5 minutes. Now, think about a minute. If you get off a minute early and think at 600 miles an hour, think how close you get to that, or how much farther away from the base you get to that bomber. And so a minute and a half was pretty good. No big deal. You know, nobody cared. They just knew who I was, that's all. Anything else?
Do you recall the day that your service ended?
Yeah, I wasn't happy.
Oh, you weren't happy?
No,
How
I had
did
to
you
get,
tell us that
had to
you-
get on a plane in Morocco and come back to the States. I didn't like that at all, you know, that was terrible. And of course, you may not want to include this, but remember I was flying cargo for the Navy, and we were in Puerto Rico, and guess what was coming from the east? A hurricane, okay? And the rains have started, and we got a message that if we could get back to Scott, we'd have the weekend off, okay? The guy, I was flying pilot that day, and the co-pilot was there. He was a little bit crazy. He had flown B-47 bombers, and he was just a little bit different than me. And so we got in the airplane, got wet, taxied out. There were some jets ahead of us on the taxiway. You couldn't see anything, okay? It was 0-0. The rain was coming down so hard, you could just barely see 30 feet in front of you. Well, the jets couldn't take off because they didn't have enough fuel to wait there, so they went back in. We were out there because we wanted to get off. And all of a sudden, co-pilot runs the radios. And he said, "Tar, this is so-and-so. We're having a clearing area over at our area. How about giving us clearance to take off?" And Tar said, "Well, it's no change over here." He said, "You better make a decision quick. This won't last long." Okay? And so finally Tar said, "Okay, if you think you can see it, you go ahead. You're cleared for takeoff." Okay? When I released the brakes, the windshield wipers were going full blast. I could not see out. I could not see the runway ahead of me. Good crew chief. He was smart. I wasn't smart enough to do this. He sits right behind us. He saw what was happening. He went over to the side and opened the side window. Now, I could look down and see the side of the runway. Okay, no problems. You know, it was only about 30 feet away. So I could see that. And the guy who was flying co-pilot, or playing co-pilot, he was running the engines and everything. And so he was calling out the speeds. And when I got to takeoff speed, he said, "Rotate." I rotated the airplane, closed the window, and I went on instruments. You can fly an airplane totally on instruments and never have to see anything. We were in this storm for 2 hours, getting away from Puerto Rico because it was following us. But it was a 0-0 takeoff, okay? I'd never had one of those before. It wasn't smart to do it, but we got home in time. And so what had happened was, we were heading back, and the best thing that happened, the co-pilot got up and went back to the latrine, okay? And the engineer would always get in the seat. He loved to fly a little bit. And he said, "Sir, I want to tell you something." He said, "I've been here in a long time." He said, "That's some of the best flying I've ever seen." Now, I wasn't particularly good on evaluations, you know, because I still was not flying like a multi-engine pilot. But for him to say that, I thought that was pretty good. Now, here's the sad part of the story. We got out of the thunderstorm. I landed at Miami, and what I didn't tell you was, when we were in Miami going away from, I always called my wife when I left the country. I'd just call her and say, "I'll be back in 3 days," okay? Some guy came up to me, I was co-pilot that night, and somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to have a hop to Puerto Rico." And I looked at the manifest, and we were carrying restricted cargo, which meant we couldn't carry passengers. So I said, "No, we can't take you," but I said, "There's a crew over there, I don't know anything about them. I think they're going the same way." So he went over there, and I could tell by the head signals that they were going to Puerto Rico same time we were, taking off at the same time, okay? So we took off, and we got about 5,000 feet, and I was checking the gauges, and I noticed that the right wing tank was emptying out too fast. And so I told the engineer, and he ran back to look at the wings. And he said, looks like we got a blown fuel cap. He said, everything will be okay if the valves hold between tanks. He said, let's let that one empty, and if this one holds, we'll go on. Well, when it got to the valve, guess what? The valve couldn't hold. And so we started emptying the second tank, which that meant we couldn't make it to Puerto Rico. And so we decided, hey, we're tired. We turned around, came back, went to bed, didn't call my wife, okay? We just went back to bed. We were tired. We'd take off the next day. Guess what happened to the other airplane? Was never heard from again. He took off about the same time we did, was never heard from again. We even had fighters running back and forth over Cuba, photo reconnaissance airplanes. They thought he was hijacked. They never did find him, okay? Headlines. Guess what the headlines were in St. Louis area? C-119 took off at 5:30 from Miami, never heard from again.
For this segment of Let's Learn Things, we're at another speaking engagement that my father is going to be involved in. This is at a senior citizen center in Belleville, and basically this is what it looks like, and he's going to be speaking today, so we're going to go ahead and record him today.
Other than that, I got one. Yeah. You got a fan version? I don't know. Maybe I'll leave that right there because I want to. I know what. I guess you don't know. This magazine is Don. You know, I don't ever see his name, but maybe I do.
In sports group. Joey Peñas registered you that Sue next to him when you came in. Joey, is there anyone who is new today?
Sure. Sure.
Anybody new other than the speaker's son is here, and she's not new, she's a former speaker here, so I will refer to her if I don't. Just realize that I'm forgetful, over the hill, tired, worn, and limited in what I do. Make sure if you see me standing during this event, it's to please my orthopedic surgeon. I'd like to please my neurosurgeon, who x-rayed my head. Nancy, you know what they found when they x-rayed my head? You know the answer. Nothing. There you go. Anyway, today we have a wonderful speaker, a wonderful time with him, timing because of Veterans Day right around the corner. And at our last meeting, I started yakking while people were eating and talking. And even these days, we find that our principal to my left would tell folks, hurry, 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 so you don't miss out on anything. Now, if you miss out on one of Jim Grimm's jokes later on, you might say, well, that's acceptable. But old Lark's here again, and at our last meeting, Jim Greenwald I interviewed him while we were eating, and the question that no one asked was, the retired superintendent from Granite City High School, who did you play he was with Minnesota in the minor leagues, name some of the players who made the major leagues, and I almost fell out of my chair when he sent me an email. My teammate catcher Butch Weiniger, now you may not remember any of these names, had a great career as a starting catcher with the Twins. I played against Dale Murphy and Rick Camp from the Braves, Tim Cochran and the famous Mark the Bird Fidrich from the Tigers, Terry Pugh, PUHL for the Astros, and a guy named Joe Cannon. He says Jerry Narin played with the Yankees. He was a backup catcher to the late Thurman Munson, who died in 1979, and managed in the big leagues. Jerry Narin managed the Rangers. Also, for the benefit of Jim Grimm, who's sitting in front of me with his SA hat on now because Philadelphia was eliminated, he said also the Phillies closer Kevin Saucier, is that how you pronounce it? S-A-U-C-I-E-R, you're nodding, that's good. He coached for major league teams. And then Jim adds in his humble way, I had a 300 batting average that season against several pitchers who played in major leagues. We had a little interview with him because at our previous 2 meetings ago, the food was served a little bit late and they cut into Jim's time. I want to thank everybody who's here today, and do me a favor without hurting your rotator cuff. Raise your hand if you served in the military of the United States. Hand up, keep them up there, or your left hand, it doesn't matter. Let's give them a big hand, folks, please. If you look around this room, one of the speakers today will be Melissa, and she's going to welcome you as well also. And she had an outstanding event that our guest speaker today was here the other day in recognition of the veterans. You will see grandkids artwork and things like that still left on the wall here. And back by Joey, where Big Jim is standing right now, there are things that make us respect the fact that Veterans Day is here, and that is one of the reasons when Bill Reynolds said, I'd like to speak to the group, he and I had no idea at that time that November 8th would get here so fast. And what are you now, sir? 9-1, is that what it is? 91. He will be the oldest speaker we've ever had here since. Dave Champion, right hand up, please. I think when you spoke here, you're like Weisenstein. That was your left hand. He's not here. You're going to try and get here.
I'm 29 years old, and his Bill's 19. We're flip-flopping our age.
You're 29 years
That's
old?
right.
That's because you had the number on and you looked in the mirror. Moving on from that, I want to remind you also that Neil Holliday normally is getting email addresses from whoever is here. If you haven't, if your email address is not on the list and you're looking at it, I could never have passed your school. I left a lot of my stuff at home. I don't know why, but I had the whole roster here, and I didn't bring it with me today. If you're not getting an email, please tell Joey Tenius and write it on a piece of paper at the entrance so he can have that. I want to move on from that to the fact that there are several handouts here, and you have 2 of them, one on Bill and the other on our future speaker. We conclude, I believe, I'm looking and stumbling again, on December 13, Brian Unger, the athletic director from Freeburg High School, among other things, he will be here. Moving on from that, I have here a Post-Dispatch, and on the headline it says, Commanders pull off last place stunner. If you don't know anything about that, the attendance prizes today include the last place stunner somewhere in there, I hope. I hope, Joey, we did do that. And the reason for that is because those of you who've been loyal and coming here quite often through the years, you remember when I tried to get a young man named Tracy Seibert here, and he was a heart problem or whatever, and he couldn't make it, and his cousin is Austin Seibert. Who's Austin Seibert? These days in this politically correct world of ours, oh Lord, that's me. My wife's tired of hearing that. You're so young looking compared to me. The point is that I said, how can you not write about this? If I were still writing my column, it would have been a headline. A guy goes from the midgets to the Redskins, which are now the Commodores, and that's Austin Seibert. So part of your attendance prizes today is a photocopy of the Hail Mary, and we're allowed to pray at senior men's group, so the poor Bears didn't pray properly. They got beat on a Hail Mary. And for the Washington team, all the points prior to the Hail Mary touchdown and their victory were by Austin Seibert, who was helping coach football for the Freeburg Midgets when he got a call about 3 weeks ago, and now he's a very wealthy Freeburg Midget coach, no doubt about that. So I want you to be aware of the handouts. Our guest speaker today is providing you 7 attendance prizes here. Tiger 24, he can refer to that when he speaks. Inspirational, he can refer to that. And as I looked you in your good eye, he's had some cataract things going on, but you can't fly these days, you know.
I could.
You could, yeah. Your son told me that you can do a lot of things, but anyway, the point is that I read parts of that, I have it, and I looked at it, and I thought this gentleman not only was a great educator, a great Top Gun pilot, and all that kind of thing, a very good author. And I looked at it and realized what a marvelous, marvelous life you had. And I know with the motivation and the fellowship in this room, you're going to be going on for some time, no doubt in my mind. I mentioned Seibert, I mentioned the handouts. I had something here on the Babe Champion. I referred to him. He has 3 sons, 2 involved with Major League Baseball, and his other son is recuperating from, what was it, Babe, broken?
3 places and broken ankle.
Broken ankle and is doing okay these days. Well, he's your son, he's got to be good, you know?
He's got a long way to go.
Well, with your help and the others, so let's make sure we have his son in mind. I have also here, among the other things for the attendance prizes, the collector's item, autographed Musial and Whitey Herzog in Stan's latter part. I also have here a part of the handouts, and I gave Bill, so you know, sometimes they say, well, what did you give the guest speaker? I said, well, nothing. No, whatever I have, who knows, but I have here a picture that is of Arvel Paul. Now, who was Arvel Paul? I'm just going by what I was told. In my first book, One Home Run, I'm not plugging the book, by the way, my royalties couldn't fill my gas tank, but that's another story. Arvel Paul apparently pitched batting practice for both the Browns and the Cardinals in 1944. And he is handicapped. He was one-armed. Now, what we say here, we won't repeat. Can't hurt Les Miller's feelings, but Les is deceased. But Arvel Paul was with the Browns in 44. In 1945, trivia question. 1945, Tom Foney, who was playing right field for the Brownies? One-armed Pete Gray. You got the answer. Very good. These McHenry graduates are incredible, aren't they? Joey, if Dr. Richards isn't here, you better give him that handout I had for McHenry winning a championship in basketball. So, why Les Miller? He said, Art, don't talk about that. I said, well, I guess you're allowed to talk. I'm allowed now. He's deceased. I love Les Miller. Pete Gray's first hit was off of Les Miller. Now, moving on from that, I also have here, because some of you folks have seen me seated at courtside at St. Louis University men's basketball. That goes back a long way. Why would I be there? St. Louis U's been very nice to me, and through the years, writing sports and covering the games and so forth, we've had a couple of guest speakers here. female basketball player Nancy already passed marriage, person, forgot her first name. Anyway, I've had speakers from St. Lucie. Roy Tippett was here years ago when he was an academic advisor, I believe. So what I have here as part of the attendance prizes, St. Lucie wins the NIT in 1948 at Macaulay and so forth. Well, I've always been close to St. Lucie, and I put my earplugs in now because they're nice enough to let me sit right in front of the pep band. And going back over there Sunday, they play again. Today, what a special day. We have in our presence a St. Lucie Hall of Famer, a former speaker here, someone who has heard the story about 1966, was it, Joe, the state tournament? Yeah. When Old Art and several thousand people awaited your return from Belleville, from Champaign, and I was innocent, and I'm taking a hand, I'm not very handy, you can tell that, so I'm hammering a flyer into the telephone pole that used to be, the poles used to be down the center of West Main Street. And a gentleman tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned, and it was a local police officer who said, "You can't do that." I said, "Why not?" And this gentleman here just had a meeting with Patty Gregory of Belleville, the mayor. She would have let me do this, but he said no. So now I got to take the nail out or whatever and tape it up or whatever, because I can't deface public property. Joe, put your right hand up, please. Please, Joe. That's a shooting hand there, okay? Give him a big hand. Within the next couple weeks, Joe Wiley, who shared this with me just a few minutes ago, will be inducted and deservedly inducted into the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. Give him another hand. He did an outstanding job here when he was a speaker. Nancy Kosovam, get your right hand up, please. That's a farmer speaker when we had the, it could have been in Millstadt at the hospice benefit, or it could have been here, but I know you were here, and Bobby is your brother. No, uncle. Well, I was close, you know. Uncle Bob spoke here also, Bob Kosovam. Give them a big hand for being here. Thank you. Melissa, I'm going to turn this microphone over to you because, you know, Jim Greenwald said, "Oh, they'll hear me." I said, "I can't hear you."
Finally.
We're ready to eat.
I know. We'll make it quick. We have a special treat today. Instead of Senior Services Plus, we have fried chicken from Aunt Betty's at the Scuda. So come up and say if you want light, white meat, or dark meat. Susan from Office on Aging is going to help you as well. If you need your food brought to you, let us know, and she'll be happy to bring it to you. Just let us know if you need dark meat or white meat. All right, we're ready.
We're almost ready. We're going to have a moment of silence. I made a list, and I have been remiss at times not having a moment of silence when we should. If there are any people who haven't been to the last meetings, I have some obits on the end of the table there, and recent deaths include, if you would give me a moment of silence, please, and if you want to add a name here, on the end of the table you'll see Ron Rujewitz, Billy Klopmeyer, and others from previous meetings that were, the names were a part of a moment of silence. If I mispronounce a name, I'm sorry. Celeste Ogney, Dick McCamick, Becky Kern, Dale Elby, Ron Hettenhausen, Tom Farquhar, Farquhar, Brian Dingus. Thank you, folks. Melissa, here we go. Chris, start us off with this anybody, and enjoy the food, enjoy the fellowship, and our speaker will be speaking a couple minutes after noon. Shooting for that. Bill, you should lead us. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, same here.
And after that,
babe, get one home.
And then there was this Irish guy that walked into a pub, tavern, with a steering wheel in his pants. The guy said, you know you got a steering wheel in your pants? He says, yeah, it's driving me nuts. But the real joke is about the Baptist minister that would sneak out every now and then to the racetrack and play the horses. So he's there one day, and this Catholic priest down there blessing the horse. And they had the race, and the horse won. Well, they had another race, and the Catholic priest was down there again blessing the horse. So, and they ran a race again, and the horse won again. And the Baptist minister says, well, I like this. He said, I'm going to get all my money out of my savings and put it on the horse, which he did. This time, the Catholic priest was down there touching the horse's ears, his eyes, his mouth, his nose, and his legs. They had the race, and the horse got about halfway around the track and dropped over dead. The Baptist minister comes down there and he says, hey, what happened? He says, that's the trouble with you Protestants. You don't know the difference between a blessing and the last rites. Anyway, guys, thank you. How about a big hand for Henny Young? Jim Grimm. Enjoy the food. We'll get going here at noon. I have news items I wanted to refer to. Headline in the Post-Dispatch. I can read it with my glasses on. Waterloo March is on, and they are in the playoffs. We've got several schools in the area playing football in the playoffs, but I refer to Waterloo because their Hall of Fame former coach and athletic director Larry Henson's down here. Right hand up, Larry, please. And that's Dave Hopper. Give him a big hand because he had provided when we had our last meeting, he had some Illinois Basketball Coaches Association handouts and books and so forth, and he's been very loyal to this group, as have others. And for Jim's benefit, and Jim well knows this, the women are welcome. You have a handout that mentions that, and I have scheduled speakers, thanks to Melissa, from January, February, March, April, May, and that's where I am. I've been working on that, and we have a list of outstanding speakers, and you sit back, relax, and I'll double check on my notes and make sure I haven't missed anything, and enjoy. Thank you.
Number 1 and 2, those are the ones they checked. And the guy who didn't need it was number 3. One night, 1 and 2 pulled on the runway. I was still on a taxiway. They take off, and just about the time the second one take off, I hear the Aero Club 172 Cessna taking off on their runway to the north. I knew exactly what I was going to do, okay? I pulled off, took off. As I turned to go on course, I pulled the throttle way back to 250 knots, and there on my radar was this great big blip. A 172 propeller makes a great big blip on radar. So I made a pass, I made a firing pass on this Cessna 172. He didn't see it. But the tower knew what was going on, and after I passed him and started on the mission, the tower says, nice shot, number 3. Flight commander said, number 1. He hears this. Nice shot, number 3. Bill, what's going on back there? I said, nothing, sir. Everything's fine. Everything we did was recorded. We had a big recorder back there. So, boy, after the mission, I put that recording in the player back, and there it was. You know, everything was just perfect. I had a perfect intercept on a Cessna 172. And of course, the flight leader, he said, that's okay, don't do it again. You're not supposed to fire on civilian airplanes.
RB-50 up yet?
Say?
RB-50, was that out yet?
Oh, yeah. The RB-50 was, I didn't get to see one, never did get to see one, but yeah. And we were, as I said, the F-86 was designed to shoot down the B-29, the Russian model of the B-29. because those big propellers, boy, it was fantastic. And even we had a radar, you know, they had something called chaff. We used to go against chaff. Well, our radar had it was pretty much done by a computer, although we didn't know what a computer was. But anyway, what happened was it would change its frequency. And if you had to go against chaff, that's no bother. You could see that. You could see that blip within the chaff. And so we just latch on to the blip. Now, sometimes the chaff would pull you off. You had to do it again or something. But we could go through chaff without any trouble at all. Yes, sir.
How strong is, or how big is Scott Air Force Base right here? It's big as in the world, or what?
Oh, Scott's a small base.
It's small base.
It's only, its runway is only about 7,500 feet. I went for runways at 12,500.
Where would be the largest, would that be? Or I'm not trying to trick you.
I don't know. I've been
Dallas.
Yeah, that's what's going on in Dallas, and they got a long runway too. Yeah, I'd say that's going on.
Edwards space-wise. How about Homestead in Florida?
Homestead, well, that used to be a big base.
Okay.
Used to have B-47s there.
Eglin's a big base.
Yeah.
I remember playing Belleville many years ago. Art had a national tournament, world tournament, was the Air Force bases, right? Offutt Air Force Base, Forbes Air Force Base, or I'm too old?
Larry Henson and I scrimmaged against some Air Force team that was going into that tournament, yes. It's after 1 o'clock now. If there are any questions that you have that you didn't get in today, we're here December the 13th. But first of all, how about recognizing a wonderful speaker of Big Haven? Humble man and a guy nice enough to provide things for us. I'm going to read attendance prize numbers here. I again salute you, Joe Wiley, for your 15th time going in the Hall of Fame somewhere. You know I can't. Also, Dirk, thank you for being here with your father. This group represents the kind of appreciation that he has had throughout his life. Joey Tenius is helping me. If you're number 7, it's on the bottom right-hand corner of your handout that has Tiger 24 on it and whatever else. Number 7 for the attendance prize. And there he is, number 7. Number 13. 13, it's in the bottom right-hand corner. 13, that's Tony Musso down here. Straight ahead of you.
Well, for this segment of Let's Learn Things, I found a Hot Wheels show over in St. Louis, and I just found this last night and just decided I'm going to go ahead and come over and see what this is about. There's several of these things. There's one at the Machinist Hall. There's another in VFW in Collinsville. And this one is at some center that I'll get the name for you later. Might see it at the bottom of the screen right now. But the it's some sort of center for these people over here. And it looks like a gym and then a side room. So it's about 10 minutes till 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, of course, it's dark outside and all, but these guys didn't get to set up last night. They have to do it in the morning, and they have a thing on their internet that says early bird is 6 a.m. There's nobody here except them setting these tables up. So let's take a look at this. So we're just going to have to sit over in the corner, and we're just going to have to wait and see what exactly does transpire here and what happens. I have no idea what's going to be at this show. In the short amount of time that there has been, they've got this place almost done. Been told there's 124 tables. So we'll see what this is going to be like.
Somebody took it off my desk and sold it. So. I had to check with Alan. He didn't bring anyone either. Maybe I'll bring it.
Today, woke up today, I'm on positive. I'm looking at little cards.
Yeah, it's a lot to do.
All right, thanks.
Keep the speedometer about the same. With the guy who took the speedometer.
Silver, green, too. harder to come by.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, brown one too, yeah.
They're $69.99. I got pictures of me in wet gear, black and white.
Have you ever seen so many? Have you ever seen so many Hot Wheels in your life? Crazy. Crazy. I think that's going to do it for this segment of Let's Learn Things. We're at the American Czech Educational Center. That's what it's called. And it's nestled down in downtown somewhere here. We got light now, so you can kind of see what's here. Where we're at, we're kind of, I don't even know where this is, but it's interesting. So that's going to do it, and we'll see you at the next show. Okay, so I wanted to take you on a little drive here because if you go to the NMRA event, Collinsville, there's two ways. One, the shortest way is taking you through the highway, and I want you to see downtown Collinsville at night. It's really something to see. So here's a little tour of what we're going to be doing. This is supposedly called St. Louis Road. Climbing up the bluff. Rough ride. Here is downtown Collinsville at night. All these little tiny shops. You could spend a day here. This is a traffic light, we make a left. There's the green. Route 66. Wow, look at the helicopter. I never saw that before. Cobra. That's at the American Legion. We're going to the VFW right up here. Hey, as we're going home, we'll go back down and take a shot at that helicopter. But this is it. And this is the entrance. Good morning, YouTubers. Take two. Good morning, YouTubers. Well, it's that time again, and well, look where we're at. It's the VFW in Collinsville, Illinois. This is the large NMRA event of the year. This show used to be over in St. Louis. It is now located here. Beautiful facility, nice and big, and ready for anything to come in here. Now, me being a Sons of the American Legion, which is right down the road, and we're gonna go try at the end of the day, I'm gonna write myself a note that we're gonna take a shot of that Cobra helicopter sitting down there. But this one here, this is gonna be the train show that you really needed to come to. And I'm just a little worried about the $8 entry fee. Well, we talked about it and I said, well, you know what? $3, you get a bunch of people. $4, there better be something there to buy. $5, if there's nothing there for me to buy off of maybe 2 tables, I'm not coming ever back. Well, we got another place that they decided they would try a $7 entry fee, cut their attendance in half. So I'm kind of hoping that this $8 doesn't cut the attendance in half, because I discussed with Brad about doing the tables, and the tables used to be 20. I said, you ain't gonna get Joe Schmo at 20 bucks. You might get him at 15. You will get him at 14 or 12. And if you don't have Joe Schmo, well, you don't have a show, okay? Because that's the guy coming in who really wants to sell his stuff. He's not going to have high-priced items. He's going to have it low. In fact, you can probably buy his whole table and he can go home. But we discussed, we got the table price down to $15, and Brad sold out. So this is the NMRA event, downtown Collinsville at the VFW, 1234 Vandalia Street to be precise. And well, yeah, it's that time. I know it's real early in the morning, but I wanted to take the tour downtown. I didn't see the helicopter before, and I think that might be new, but we're going to take a look at that at the end. But we're going to be here 10 to 3, I believe it is. So, or is it 9? Could be that too. So we will see you when the doors open. We're open, and most of the people have already set up, and there's also a little buying going on. NMRA event also has a model contest room, which is down here.
started on your church, but I haven't made progress yet.
That's the contest room. Everybody's getting their models out and they're going to look at those and judge those today. And we'll come back later on when a few more are here. Oh, wow. For this segment of Let's Learn Things, I'm here with Brad Joseph, who has now taken over the NMRA fall meet. Is that right? Winter?
Apparently I took over this one. I don't know. It's a little late to give up on that plan now.
He took over and sold the place out, has a food truck out front, and they've got all their contest. And what's back in that room?
Well, so we got contests back in that room. We got three different types, with two different types of contests and a display category. We have, give or take, 140 entries in the contest for this fall meet. Last year we had 39, I believe, so substantial improvement there. And we had some fantastic models. Man, some fantastic rolling stock from people who hadn't shown up before. But and then we had participation prizes for people that brought different models that they could draw a ticket and they walked away with a nice prize. And of course, the people who win first prize in the category, they're also getting some very nice prizes as well. That's going to be announced pretty soon here.
Well, that sounds terrific. And with the NMRA meet, you get layouts. Who we have here this year?
Man, so we had two great layouts here. We had the H.O. Fremo. Ricky Kyle organized that for us, and then Jeremy Jansen set up the N-scale modular layout, which was running fantastic. Everybody had such a great time watching those. And then tonight, we got two winners on the tour this afternoon, actually. Everybody knows about K10, Ken Krosowitz's layout, which is a national treasure. And then they get to see Tony and Joe Pellegrino's ICG at Alton Division. Almost said Afton Division, pardon me. But which is a really good running layout. I've had the pleasure of being able to run a couple operating sessions on his layout, and it's a beautiful layout, runs great, very historically accurate. So that's a great opportunity as well.
So how many vendors did we have this year?
Well, I'm not quite sure of the number of vendors, actually. We had 51 tables all sold.
Okay.
So I believe the number of vendors was somewhere about 34 different vendors. I had guys calling me last night. I got the last call last night at 10:30, actually, wanting to know if we had any more tables. And we had a guy come all the way from Wisconsin Yes, yeah. And so the word's gotten around a little bit that it's been fun, and I think most of the fellows did a pretty good job. Nobody, you can't satisfy everybody all the time. And these guys that didn't have enough Union Pacific stuff to sell, well, they're not going to make any money if they don't have enough Union Pacific stuff to sell, right? I mean, who wants to buy this Mopac and KCS stuff, right?
Well, Santa Fe.
Well, Santa Fe, I mean, come on, it's not the Union Pacific, but we all know it.
So,
It's tongue-in-cheek, by the way. That's tongue-in-cheek.
yes, we know that. We're joking. So do we have anything set up for next year?
We have absolutely nothing set for next year. We have forced ourselves to completely ignore next year until we get this year out of the way, Dirk.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
There may be some discussions about next year at the bar after everybody's left, but we'll see about that.
Well, I thought it turned out really well. It's very well organized. Last year was good. This year is good. So, and I know everybody was panicking this morning out in the parking lot at 6 a.m.
Boy, I was nervous. I was a nervous wreck, yes, at 6 a.m. before the gal showed up to let us in the place. Because we had a few glitches here and there, and I could just imagine opening the door and not seeing any tables set up. But no, it went well. It went very well. I'm very pleased, and thanks to guys like you. You were a big help. Bob was a big help, drumming up some guys for us. And, we hadn't had a show for several years because of the whole COVID baloney, and then it took a while to get organized. We had the national convention here, so we didn't have the manpower to get one going, but now we've had 2 in a row that have been very successful, and we're going to keep it rolling and improve things from here on in, right?
That's right, because it was, I got together, we talked about a couple of things. I know you got with some other guys, and all the input helps to get, shows where they need to be. So, Brad, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're very welcome, buddy. No troubles, no problems. Glad you enjoyed it.
So we're going to be here next year, I'm sure, somewhere. Okay, we'll let you know with flyers and announcements. Watch the Facebook page, watch the YouTube channel, and we'll let you know. So that's going to do it for this segment of Let's Learn Things.